Oh, yeah. Okay. Getting stoned on Sunday.
Alright, hello there, thrill seekers. That was a little outtake from the making of the video for Life's a Trippy Thing, and I didn't even notice that Ziggy was standing at the door of the garage watching us do that video, so it was kind of cute when I saw that. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about Phony Zen Masters, and the reason is I have been writing a book. It's plodding along very slowly. I don't know when it'll be finished, let alone be published, but it's about Buddhism in America, and I wanted to talk about the certification process, which I've been talking about on this video channel a little bit recently for becoming a so-called Zen Master or an authorized teacher in Zen. And in order to kind of make an interesting way into this, I am starting out the chapter talking about a couple of phony Zen Masters, 2 phony American Zen Masters. And when I was researching this, I could only actually come up with 2 phony American Zen Masters who were sort of well known. There are probably a few out here and there in the hinterlands doing their thing on a low level, but the only 2 of them have risen to any sort of fame, and they're 2 very different cases. So I thought it was interesting to talk about them and to examine them. And they would be, did I say this already? This is my second take on this video, so forgive me, I've forgotten exactly what I said on the first take because it got ruined. Anyway, the 2 are Philip Kapleau Roshi, or Roshi Philip Kapleau as he called himself, and Zen Master Rama. And as I said, there are 2 very different cases. In case you haven't heard of either of them, they're both passed away now. Most of my information that I'm getting about Philip Kapleau Roshi comes from an article by James Ishmael Ford that appeared in Lion's Roar, and good Lord, I don't know if this is the title of the article, this is the heading. As Rochester Zen Center celebrates its 50th anniversary, Zen teacher James Ishmael Ford reflects on that community's unique importance and that of its founder, Roshi Philip Kapleau. I would love to give you a link, but Lion's Roar has this kind of weird system where you can only look at 2 of their articles per month or some stuff without having to pay. So finding the link would mean I can't look at another article this month. So you're just going to have to find it yourself. But he says a lot, James Ford says a lot about the Rochester Zen Center, but here's what he says about Philip Kapleau, and particularly about the reason I include him among the list of phony Zen Masters. So here we go. Philip Kapleau was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1912. He served as chief court reporter for the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, and later was also court reporter at the trials in Tokyo. These are the war crimes trials that happened after World War II. While in Japan, he met a number of prominent Zen teachers, including Soen Nakagawa, Sogaku Harada, and Hakun Yasutani, the founders of the Harada Yasutani line of koan studying Soto Zen. After coming back to America, he felt profoundly dissatisfied with his life and decided to return to Japan in 1953. After spending 3 years at Hoshinji with Harada Roshi, Kapleau became the first Westerner to begin formal study with Hakun Yasutani. After some 20 sesshin, so sesshin are intensive meditation practices, the Roshi confirmed Kapleau's awakening. In 1966, after 10 years studying with his teacher, he came home to America, this is Kapleau, and with Yasutani Roshi's permission founded the Rochester Zen Center in upstate New York. Now, here's where it gets problematic. There are several accounts of the reasons for his famous break with Yasutani Roshi. The most commonly reported version suggests deep disagreement about appropriate forms for the nascent North American center. Another story is that Kapleau objected to the close association of his teacher to another senior student who Kapleau felt was lax in his ethics. It says, Philip Kapleau was an aggressive personality who rubbed a number of people the wrong way, including several visiting Japanese teachers. More important, there were the growing tensions between Yasutani Roshi and Philip Kapleau. The specifics are debated, so basically nobody knows. But the tensions appear in significant part to have to do with Kapleau's leadership of his center, his increasingly independent style, his departures in liturgical usage, and his relationships with visiting teachers. The tensions all came to a head when Yasutani Roshi informed Kapleau that he, Kapleau, would no longer be considered Yasutani's student. At this time, Kapleau had completed about half of the Harada Yasutani koan curriculum. Could he in good faith continue to teach, considering his permissions were limited to introducing people to the practices of the Sambo Kyodan, or Three Treasures, as the Yasutani school called itself, to which he no longer belonged? Regardless, Kapleau decided to continue as a teacher. And he continued, or started, at some point he started calling himself Roshi Philip Kapleau. Now, Roshi is a funny term. I think that in the Yasutani Harada line, Roshi actually does have a specific sort of, I don't know, title. It's used as a title. Now, in standard Soto Zen, which I study, which is the Yasutani Harada lineage and Sambo Kyodan, is a kind of a little off. I wouldn't call them a cult or anything like that, but they're definitely not standard Soto style Zen. So they incorporate a lot of Rinzai stuff, including that koan curriculum stuff. So, which is where you answer the funny questions, in case you don't know, like what is the sound of one hand clapping, what was the shape of your face before your parents were born, and so on. These are so you go through this curriculum of koans in theirs, and that's not standard procedure in Soto Zen. But in standard Soto Zen, the term Roshi doesn't have any specific meaning. It's not a title. It's an honorific that you can call somebody if you like them. This is why I call my teacher Nishijima Roshi. I used to just call him Nishijima or Nishijima Sensei, but I realized a lot of people didn't understand or didn't thought that maybe he wasn't a fully transmitted teacher because I didn't call him Roshi. So now I just call him Roshi all the time. But in his lifetime, I never called him Roshi. We would just call him Sensei, because Roshi seems kind of like you're blowing smoke up somebody's ass, to use an Americanism. And if you're not an American and don't understand what that means, it means like you're trying to overly flatter the person. So calling him Roshi felt weird, so I never called him Roshi. But so that's what it is. It's a term of high. It's a high honorific. It just means old teacher, literally, but it has some honorific. So I don't know if Roshi Philip Kapleau was breaking any rules by calling himself Roshi, but he was not a Dharma transmitted teacher, and calling himself Roshi made it seem like he was a Dharma transmitted teacher. And then he went on to do Dharma transmission with some of his students, apparently, allegedly. This is what I've heard, the scuttlebutt. And that's definitely not something you would do if you were you don't do that without the specific lineage permission to do that. But the reason, I don't know, like I said, this is a second take on this video, so I don't remember if I said this. In one version of this video, maybe this one, I said something about, I don't know if the word phony is really applicable to Philip Kapleau, because I don't think he was a phony in a really heavy sense, because he did, as I read in James Ishmael Ford's article, he did do plenty of study, plenty of sessions, plenty of work on himself. He had the confirmation of enlightenment, which is another thing that's not really standard in the standard normal Soto style Zen. In normal Soto style Zen, a teacher does not confirm your enlightenment as such. I mean, there are certain things that might be called that, but it's not like you are enlightened, isn't really a thing. Although it is apparently in the Yasutani Harada Sambo Kyodan lineage, because I've actually heard of situations where people are brought forth in front of the group and said, hey, Bob has gotten enlightened. So it happens. But that's not standard Soto style. So probably Kapleau figured he was enlightened, he had done his study, he was trying to transmit this thing to America, and he's just going to he's just going to act like he's gotten transmission when he hasn't. But that doesn't mean that he was a complete fraud, so this is kind of a fine line. He was a fraud in the sense that he was not telling the truth about his transmission. or not, yeah, Dharma transmission, but he wasn't just a complete phony. The other guy I want to talk about was a complete phony, and that is Zen Master Rama, aka Frederick Lenz. And there are a few documentaries about him out there on the internet, and I want to tell you about one that I watched last night. It's on YouTube, so you're probably watching this on YouTube, so you can go look it up if you want. And it's by the person who posted it, or entity that posted it, is called Atrocity Guide. But the title of the video is "The Enlightenment Fraud of Zen Master Rama." It's an hour and 16 minutes. It's a semi-professional documentary. I found the editing and stuff of it a little bit weird, but it's all right. And it goes into this guy, Frederick Lenz, who I first heard of probably around the same time, a little bit after I heard of Philip Kapleau. I heard of Philip Kapleau because my teacher, who was the class that I took called Zen Buddhism at Kent State University, had three books that were required reading. Anyway, two of them were Three Pillars of Zen by Philip Kapleau Roshi and Zen by Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, and the third one was a book called Unsui, and I don't know the title of that. But the reason that Tim McCarthy assigned those is because he thought Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind was a good explanation of how standard sort of Soto Zen is, and he thought that Three Pillars of Zen was a good explanation of how Rinzai Zen is done. Now, even though this is Philip Kapleau would have probably considered himself to be a Soto teacher, this is like 1983 or something, or 82, whatever year I took that class, so there wasn't a lot available out there that was appropriate reading for introductory purposes and would be entertaining enough for kids like me to read when I was 19 or 20 or whatever age I was. So that became his book to teach about how Rinzai style Zen was done. And on that book, the version I have gives his name as Roshi Philip Kapleau, and I'll show it on screen because I don't have a copy anymore. But I noticed when I looked it up that the new versions of it, still in print, don't say Roshi on them. There you go. Anyway, let's get back to Zen Master Rama. So Zen Master Rama I heard about because at the time, in the early 80s, he was very active in trying to recruit college students, university students, to his cause, and I'm pretty sure I must have seen a flyer for him or something around Kent State. And it was... he always used this picture of himself. He had this big sort of blonde afro, and this famous photographer who photographed everybody in those days. He used to put like a light behind people and photograph them like that. And he had this photo session with him, and his photos with his glowing halo were all over the place. And Frederick Lenz was his real name. Did I say that? I don't remember. And he had been a student of a guy named Sri Chinmoy, who I knew at the time as a guy whose quotations appeared on the back of Santana albums sometimes. So Santana was into him, and John McLaughlin, the other famous guitar player, was really into Chinmoy. And Chinmoy was a Hindu guy. He was not a Buddhist at all, or a Zen Buddhist. And somehow Frederick Lenz broke away from Chinmoy and started calling himself Zen Master Rama. And the name Zen Master Rama was, even with what little I knew from, one semester of a class called Zen Buddhism, and just a lot of, at the time I was reading a lot of stuff about the subject of Eastern religions on my own. So the name Zen Master Rama was like a red flag to me right away, because like it's I was trying to think of a way to explain how weird that sounds. It'd be like calling yourself Father Rubinowitz. That's not a good example, because maybe a Jewish person could get convert to Catholicism and become a Catholic priest. But it's a mix. So Zen Master is from the Zen tradition, and it's even not a widely used term by actual Zen masters. And then Rama is from the Hindu tradition, so it's like, what are you doing? And he taught Tantric Zen, which is another, Tantra is Tibetan Buddhist practice, also a Hindu practice, but it's not a practice in Zen. So Tantric Zen, it just, what is that? That's like saying Jewish Catholicism. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Of course, there are the Jews for Jesus, so, maybe that is a thing. But anyway, he didn't know nothing from nothing about Zen. I mean, I've looked at some of his clips and stuff, and I watched that documentary last night, which had a bunch of stuff about him, and I read some stuff about him at the time, and he didn't know the first thing about Zen. But he used the name Zen Master Rama because there's a kind of brand recognition. And I'm pretty sure I wrote about Zen Master Rama in my first book, Hardcore Zen, although I didn't bother to go look it up and make certain, but I'm pretty sure I remember doing this and making the analogy to McDonald's. So this is the whole thing about lineage. As I said last week, and I'll say it again, in the Zen form of Buddhism, to become an authorized teacher, there's not just a sort of master and student recognition of awakening, for want of a better word, but there is also paperwork. And I, a couple of years ago, brought out my paperwork, and I said this last week, and showed it to the internet land, and now I still can't find them. They're in a box somewhere, but I have them. So there's certain paperwork, and it's very specific. And Dogen writes in an essay called Shisho, which means certificate of transmission. He talks about this and talks about the fact that even in his time, 800 years ago, there were fake Zen masters. And he talks about how to recognize the actual documents of transmission and differentiate them from the fake documents of transmission. And he says that a lot of times teachers in his day would be pressured into sort of recognizing people as Dharma heirs who didn't deserve it. And I assume these are people who had high political or military positions who could kind of use, probably even threat of violence to make a teacher do that. And that what usually happened is these teachers would write out the certificates deliberately wrongly, so that, later on somebody who knew the difference could be like, oh yeah, this is fake. And that was a kind of a common technique in those days to do it. But the thing about these certifications, there were a couple of people in the comments section when I brought this up last week who objected, like, oh, this is a spiritual thing, how can you certify it? How can you have paperwork about it? But that's the thing. There are plenty of mystical traditions where they don't have any paperwork. The one I'm kind of familiar with, because I've been reading a lot of books about him, is Nisargadatta Maharaj's lineage, or whatever you call it. And he apparently transmitted his student Ramesh Balsekar by simply saying to him, how come you aren't teaching? And that Balsekar took as permission to go teach independently, and then he started doing that. I think he waited until Nisargadatta had passed away before he came out as a full-fledged teacher. But there's no paperwork or anything. So it seems to me, from what research I've done, is most of Nisargadatta Maharaj's students accept that Ramesh Balsekar was legitimately given permission by Nisargadatta to teach, but there's no paperwork. And the thing I compare it to is McDonald's, right? I did this in the book, pretty sure I did this in the book. But you might make a perfectly great hamburger. You might make a hamburger that beats the pants off of anything that McDonald's makes. But you can't call yourself a McDonald's unless you do it the McDonald's way, and unless you have the specific permission from McDonald's to do that. Because otherwise, you are usurping all of the brand loyalty and brand recognition and advertising and whatnot that McDonald's does. So if I start a burger stand, which I wouldn't because I'm a vegetarian, but who cares? Anyway, if I started a burger stand and just called it McDonald's, I'd get sued, and rightfully so, because I don't have any right to call myself McDonald's, even if my burger happens to be better than a real McDonald's burger. And that's kind of the way it is with the Zen thing. You can't call yourself a Zen teacher unless you have the proper authorization. And people who do that are not being honest. Now, in the case of Philip Kapleau, he seemed to be a as far as I could tell, a decent guy, and he did have a deep knowledge of this stuff and a deep commitment to practice and some understanding, apparently. And so, okay, but he chose to fabricate this transmission, which kind of draws everything down a little bit. In the case of Zen Master Rama, he was just a total phony. He was just a blowhard con man, and he made a lot of money, and it's now very problematic because after he committed suicide, he had a trust set up before he committed suicide that was going to give his money to people promoting Zen Buddhism, and a lot of people take his money and then feel like legit Zen places take the Lens Foundation money and then are like, this is kind of dirty money. I don't take any Lens Foundation money. Nobody's offered it to me, but it's kind of become a thing. So yeah, phony Zen masters. I don't really have anything conclusive to say about it except to make the point that there is this system for certifying a Zen teacher, and it needs to be followed if you're going to call yourself a Zen teacher. Again, you may be a perfectly enlightened spiritual being and have wonderful things to say, and maybe by comparison, some of the people who've had the actual transmission with the certification and blah blah and everything else are not as good as you. Could be the case. There's probably several cases like that right now, but you can't call yourself a McDonald's unless you have the McDonald's franchise, and you can't call yourself a Zen teacher unless you have the paperwork that proves it. So that's kind of my point. And yeah, I kind of went all over the place with that, so I hope that wasn't too convoluted to follow, and I hope it was at least entertaining. So if you want to send money to me to provide more entertainment like this, you can go to the links that are below on YouTube in the description, or if you don't like that, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on your screen right now, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, and that's where you will find my PayPal and Patreon links, and those are my main ways of making a living, so I appreciate your support, but you don't gotta support me if you don't want to support me. Alright, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye! Hi, Ziggy. Ziggy did not come outside with me today because it's too darn hot outside, so he's been inside in the air conditioning. That's probably good. We had his fur trimmed to make him a little cooler, but it's still too hot for him out there. All right, Ziggy, enjoy the air conditioning. Bye.